Hey, Randy here. Thank you for clicking into the sermon for this week. I hope we can be a benefit or a blessing to you as you watch and listen. And our prayer is that Jesus would become more real to you than ever before. God bless you. This was a particularly difficult. I had a particularly difficult day on Tuesday. Something happened that was rather dramatic and traumatic that I'm still kind of trying to recover from it. I had an early meeting at Elevate Coffee at 6 o'clock with Tim East. Those of you that are from the Palmcroft, you know Tim. Tim, we go way back years ago. And so we had this great meeting regarding church security of the future, and he and I just had a great time together. Well, when he left, I went out to my car and I took out my remote to my old Honda, and the unlock button didn't work. Right, that's what I'm saying. It was very traumatic. And so I'm hitting and the trunk is opening, but the door isn't. And I'm like, there's a demon in my remote or something. And so not sure what all is happening, but the trunk opened. And so I went back in and I saw an old friend, Michael Sawyer. That's the son of Dr. Sawyer, who was just here a few weeks ago. And I said, Michael, I've got a problem. He says, well, is there a hatch through the back of the trunk into the cabin of the car? And I said, yes. And so I went out and I opened the trunk and I looked at the hole between the trunk and the cabin. And I realized that it was slightly smaller than me. And so to make things worse, I look and they're putting a couple of restaurants in at Norterra, you may have seen. And so there were two construction guys in a truck watching me. And every time I went to make eye contact, they just kind of looked down. And so I go back inside again and I come back out and I take my coat off and I'm like, here we go. So I go back inside one more time and I said, Michael, I'm going in. So he dialed 911 and then he said, wait a minute, someone just drove by and texted me and said that there is a hole in the handle of your door. I said, like an unlock hole? Yeah. I said, stand by. So I ran out and so if you're ever in this predicament, this portion of the key actually unlocks the door. So I got into the car and I'm driving. The guys in the trucks are wetting themselves. They're laughing so hard at this point. So I drive to AutoZone right there at 19th Ave in Happy Valley, and I go in and I go, I need a battery, and he goes, and then he's typing and he's looking and he goes, funny thing happened yesterday. And I said, what's that? He goes, a guy shows up and he couldn't get into his car. He didn't know that this key went into the hole in the handle. And I have a decision to make at this point. I chose not to tell him. He's typing a little more, and I'm just thinking to myself, I got to get out of here. And God is my witness. He said these words. He goes, what an idiot he was. Of course, I said, oh, can you believe that dork? I realize that the unexpected shakeups in your family are probably maybe a little bit harder than the one I dealt with this week. I'll give you that. But I do know that when an unexpected family shakeup occurs, that something happens similar to what happened with me with the door. And that is sometimes the things that we know in our minds. I mean, how many times have I seen the hole in the door handle of that old Honda? I've owned the Honda for 10 years. So I've looked at it literally thousands of times. But when shakeups occur, sometimes we don't think as clearly, or we're not processing like we would under normal circumstances because our routine has changed. And at that moment, we have to think about lots of things and consequences and ramifications and people and the bigger the issue, the higher the more things that are at stake is what I'm trying to say, the more difficult it is at times to make rational decisions. In this past week, I found a passage of Scripture, and if you have your Bible or if you want to look it up in your phone, go to John chapter 8. And it's in John chapter 8 that it's a passage that you may not have considered when thinking about this topic of dealing with an unexpected shakeup in your life. But I think there's some things here to apply to it. Read silently as I read aloud here, 8:1. They went into each of his home, but Jesus went to the Mount of Olives. Let me stop there for a minute. The Mount of Olives, it's a little deceiving. If you haven't seen the Mount of Olives is more like a hill than it is a mountain. You can stand on top of the Mount of Olives, which I've done many times, and in just normal sneakers, you can walk right down the side of the Mount of Olives. The Mount of Olives on that side is a Jewish cemetery, and it's absolutely, I should have thrown a picture up there. It's absolutely beautiful with these white tombs that are all on the side of that mountain. And so that's where all this has taken place. And it says in verse 2, early in the morning, he came again to the temple. All the people came to him, and he sat down and he taught them. So the distance between the Mount of Olives and the temple, it isn't bad. In fact, you can actually see where the temple was, the Temple Mount. You can actually see that from the top of the Mount of Olives. Probably take about a half hour to walk. Verse 3, the scribes and the Pharisees brought a woman who had been caught in adultery. And placing her in the midst, they said to him, "Teacher, this woman has been caught in the act of adultery. Now, in the law, Moses commanded us to stone such women. So what do you say?" This they said to test him, that they might have some charge to bring against him. Jesus bent down and wrote with his finger on the ground. And as they continued to ask him, he stood up and he said to them, "Let him who is without sin among you be the first to throw the stone." And once more he bent down and he wrote on the ground a second time. And then they heard it. They went away one by one, beginning with the older ones, and Jesus was left alone with the woman standing before him. Jesus stood up and said, "Woman, where are they? Has no one condemned you?" She says, "No one, Lord." And Jesus says, "Then neither do I. Go from here and sin no more." This picture of these angry, self-righteous, hurtful, compassionless men, in all of their pride, couldn't use this woman as a pawn fast enough as they throw her onto the ground to teach Jesus a lesson. Couldn't do it fast enough. And as I think about this story, as I drive and as I just kind of live my life, and I did a bunch of chores on Saturday and on Friday, and I'm doing mindless things, but this thing working in my mind, I almost couldn't get past this. That in the lowest, most painful, the most sinful moment of this woman's life, reaching a depth that she couldn't fathom, nor could you, of humiliation plus shame, all happening at exactly the same time, and her heart expecting to be stoned. So literally facing death. She meets Jesus. Yesterday I came this close to just preaching this point, which is this. If you don't hear the voice of Jesus right away, don't panic. He's up to something. Imagine her laying on the ground. Probably has cried so much that she can't even produce a tear anymore. With her family watching, more than likely, because this is a spectacle. And the first thing that Jesus does is he deals with the men. She has no idea where this is going. The likelihood of her understanding and having a belief or any kind of confidence that Jesus was going to rescue her, not knowing his story and not knowing what's going to happen, and him being a religious leader and having all of this religious leaders, all of these holy people come and preparing to stone her to death. All likelihood, she knew that her days were now down to hours, which more than likely is down to minutes. Yet the first thing he does is he deals with these men. The whole time, her feeling her humiliation and her guilt, or her aloneness, and maybe even a little angry. I'd be shocked if there wasn't a little bit of anger, because she got caught with a guy, and he's not in the room. They let him go. And I'm sure there's a part of her scratching her head going, I don't understand. For some of you, I know the things going on in your life because I'm your pastor. Others I know because I've met you in the lobby. You know who you are. There are things occurring in your lives that look as bleak. They look and feel as painful. And you are as lonely as the woman in John 8. I can't make many promises to you. But the one that I can make all day, every day, is Jesus is doing something behind the scenes. And he's not only aware, he's active. Amen. That kind of hope, my friend, I will go to my grave preaching that hope. I think of Psalm 13, 1 through 3. It says this, how long, O Lord, will you forget me? Forever? David writes. How long will you hide your face from me? How long must I wrestle in my thoughts and every day in my sorrow in my heart? Where are you? And for how long are you going to forget me? Now notice it's poetic. And so the writer knows that he hasn't been forgotten, but sometimes it feels like it. And the reason I love John 8 more than maybe in other chapters for this reason is when you and I find ourselves in these dark, lonely, painful situations because of our own decisions and our own actions. Not to say that it happens all the time. I understand that. And there's always, it takes two, right? I get all of that. But sometimes we find ourselves in places where we realize that no one put me here except me. And because we are human, and because we have been self-righteous in the way we view others at times, and we think that they're in that predicament because they deserve it, and so we kind of emotionally and even sometimes spiritually, God forbid, we kind of wash our hands and going, you know what, they can deal with it, they got themselves into this mess. This is a story where she, more than likely, got herself into this mess. Here's my point. Here's my hope. Jesus didn't care. He didn't care. It's not like he said, well, you got yourself into a pickle. Well, yeah, I've got an issue going on here. Yeah. Well, we're going to have to make you pay a little bit. No. He only showed compassion. This brings me to the second point, is number 2, is Jesus rarely works in the same way twice. 8:6, it says this. This they said to test him, that they might have some charge to bring against him. Jesus bent down and wrote in his finger on the ground. So he took his finger and he wrote something. We don't know what it is, right? I mean, we don't have a clue. We have preachers that have speculated, but he's writing certain things. And the process to rescue her began with his finger in the dirt. So for the theologians in the room, tell me how many times in the Gospels, in fact, let's kind of stretch it. All the way from Genesis all the way to Revelation, how many times did we see God start visibly working by his finger in the dirt? How many? How many would say 1,000? 100? 10? How about no other? Never. I appreciate stories of God's redemption like no one else. But I have never, in my 55 years of life, in my 45 years of knowing Jesus, I have never, ever seen him work the same way in 2 different situations. Ever. Your story, your pain, your shame, your dilemma is as unique to you as his working in your life. Why do I say that? Because of books and sermons, and now we have access to online, and we just assume at times that if God did this for them, then he's going to do this for us, for me. And he works differently. And I'll be honest with you, I wish that there was a cookie cutter template that he used, because it would take less faith to follow him and trust him. Anyone agree with that? I would rather work and live in such a way that required less faith. But what happens is that God puts me in situations that are so unique to me and to us and to this church and to my family that it requires the same thing it requires of all of us. His working is different, but it's the same thing, and that is trust and faith and waiting. I had someone at coffee the other day talking about their lives. And she said something that I thought was funny. She says, well, I'm a little bit of a control freak. I couldn't let it go. And I said, who isn't? Like, do you think the church is filled with people going, I'm just going to let everyone determine my life? I just love the fact that others control and they can push and pull and do as they wish because I don't like control. See, that's kind of ridiculous. I go, yeah, pretty much ridiculous. And I don't think God does it on purpose, but I think he takes the world and the sin and all the things that happen in the world, and I don't think it's a secret that he takes all of that garbage to teach us to trust in that we are out of control way more than we'd like to admit. Number 3, Jesus does some of his best work when he's alone with you. Verse 8 says, and once more he bent down and wrote on the ground, and when he had heard it, they went away one by one, beginning from the older ones. Why do you think it was the older ones? If I was leading a men's Bible study, which I enjoy doing, I would stop and we would camp out on that all hour. Why is it that the older ones walked away sooner? Talk amongst yourself at lunch today on that, would you? And then it said, he was left alone with the woman standing before him. And Jesus stood up and said, woman, where are they? And he has this conversation with her and he says, hey, you are about ready to get stoned. And where are they? I'm like, they're not here anymore. Oh, correct. And not only are they not going to condemn you, nor will I. And then he gives instruction to stand and leave your life of sin. It says sin no more. That doesn't mean that she's going to be sinless. There's only a few of us that have reached that. But as he made instruction to her, he says, go and leave that lifestyle. And there was this freedom that came at that moment. Not just because she wasn't stoned, but he handed her her life back. How cool is that? In all of her conniving and all of the and going from man to man and all of the pain and the heartache and the hurt and the shame and all of that, he says, go and sin no more. And I believe with all of my heart that Jesus does some of his best work when he's alone with you. And when he's alone with you, and you don't have the music and TV and work, and it's just that quiet moment that you say things like, Jesus, my heart hurts so bad that it actually physically hurts. How many of your hearts have hurt so bad that they physically hurt? Let me see your hands. You know what I mean. And what I understand to be true from scriptures, but also just by my own life, just from sheer empirical evidence. That when I give him opportunity to speak softly into a painful situation, it always ends up freeing me from bondage. Now, sometimes God can speak to you when it's loud. I remember when our daughter played soccer. She ended up playing some college soccer, and there's all kinds of yelling going on both sides and coaches, but she could always hear me and Mama. And because I don't know soccer, my advice was always wrong. And after the game, she goes, "Dad, you're killing me." I go, "Well, if you just listened." She goes, "Dad, that would have been offsides." I go, "I don't know what that means." She goes, "I know." And so sometimes as Tessa's out there yelling and everyone's screaming and she could hear our voice, sometimes we can hear God's voice in the midst of it. He makes it loud enough or distinct enough. Maybe that's the best word. That there's distinct moments where you go, that's of God. But oftentimes, for me, it's these quiet moments of chapter 8, verse 6, where Jesus was left alone and everyone had scattered. And I don't know if she was still on the ground or not. I would like to believe that he helped her up. Said it's safe now. And gave her some instruction for life that freed her from bondage. One of the most life-changing moments of quiet time that I've had with God happened the first week of October. Some of you are here when I told this story. I'll tell you the short version. I go to the mountains by myself, and with my personality and temperament, going anywhere by yourself for a few days is nothing less than torture. Now, I have a brother who would live to go away from people like me. Not me. I like people. I'm that guy that when AJ has teenagers in the building at the office and my door is closed, I'm supposed to be studying, I have to come out and I have to play. If they've got Nerf, count me in. So for me to go away was a pretty big decision on my part, knowing that I needed to be alone with God, similar to 8:6. And I remember as clear as day, no one around. The sliding door is open. I'm looking down through pine I'm up on a hill in this beautiful home. You can just see pine trees for miles. It was just absolutely gorgeous. And this breeze and the sun. And it was the first week of October. You can only picture it, right? And I remember saying to God, I wrote it down so I make sure that I quoted myself correctly here. So I don't know what to do with this church. I don't know where to go. We're up against it. We have things that outside of a miracle, I have no ideas. And he said as clearly as he could, it's not your church, it's my church. These are not your problems, they're my problems. And I couldn't hear that here. I had to go away. And I remember just dropping my journal and my Bible, and I just sunk in this seat. And I thought, who am I to say that this church and these problems are mine? Who am I? How arrogant is that? Number 4, Jesus is the ultimate multitasker. How many multitaskers in the room? Okay. How many of you can carry a conversation with the person across the table, but also follow the one behind you? I'll get in the car and Judy said, oh man, they had a situation going. I go, who are you talking about? She goes, oh. And she starts talking about all their whole life. And I'm like, who are you talking about? Oh, the people behind us. You mean those people over there? Oh no, they had a different situation. And I'm like, what in the world? John 8 verse 12, it says, and again, Jesus spoke to them saying, I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will not walk in darkness, but will have the light of life. And in the midst of her story, in the midst of her chaos, in the midst of this life-changing moment, he turns and he speaks truth to the enemies in love. And he also gives an invite. Interesting how he still invites those who are against him. I think that's fascinating. The very people who are trying to trip him up, he's offering the light of light. Here's my point for you. Here's the point for me. At every situation and every dilemma and every painstaking situation that you have going, God is doing things at the same time at other levels with hundreds of thousands and maybe millions of people, and it's all working together. And so when you think that you are completely alone, when you believe that you, whether it's your sin or whether it's you're a complete victim of another situation or a little bit of both, no matter the circumstances, no matter whether it's physical or spiritual or relational or financial, no matter what is happening, no matter who is causing it, no matter what is you see as the enemy against you, Jesus is working a plan in your life and in a million other people, all at the same exact time. Who would ever have guessed that this passage would come to Anthem, Arizona and be preached to 200 people today? She wouldn't have guessed that. And so when I go and have a decision to make, and when I have to decide whether I should trust or can trust, all I need to know is that he's been faithful in the past and he will be faithful in the future. And for some in this room, maybe one, maybe more, you've never had to trust at that level ever. And God is saying, I want you to trust now. Because I'm going to start building faith muscles. And you're going to need those faith muscles. I was at Lowe's because of my project the other day. And I got out of the car and this guy had a box. I think it was a sink and a vanity. And he was looking at the truck and he was looking at the vanity and he was looking at the truck. And the last time I had this situation, someone was laughing at me in their truck. And so I thought it's my job to maybe do something positive for the kingdom, seeing that these two goofballs that laughed at me. I'm not bitter, I'm just saying. And so I got out and I helped lift this big, huge box. And I believe that I wouldn't have tried it, except I've been working under Jason and Janelle for 6 months, and they've been kicking my rear 3 times a week at CrossFit. And I'm like, I can lift this thing. I mean, I wanted to say, get out of the way, I'll do it myself. Hold my root beer. So, I have to believe that God's doing something in your life that's causing you to build faith muscles. And just like our friend Anthony in the video, that through the death of Mason, and through the things that Mason put out to his family and to his Savior, the difference that Mason is making today in the kingdom and for decades to come, more than likely, is you can't even wrap our human minds around it. And I don't know what you're facing today. And I don't know if you deserve to be laying on the dirt and that there's others in your life that are preparing to stone you at work, your family, whatever. Doesn't matter. Jesus is for you all day, every day. Last point, and this is just to kind of finish it. This is only Jesus can bring meaning from chaos. Tim Keller once said, suffering is unbearable if you aren't certain that God is for you and with you, right? Sometimes the reason I can bear it is to know that God's up to something. And he's walking through with me. And I may be in a fire, but he's not going to allow me to get burned. I've enjoyed preaching this message, knowing that there's folks in this room that are in the fire. I've enjoyed this message more than I have in many others. Because churches can do things and people can do things and organizations, but there's only one person, just one, that is with you all the time, every day, all day. And it's Jesus, and I just introduced you to him. And to have that connection, that spiritual connection with him and say, Jesus, I'm all in with you. He just requires us to say, I'm no longer trusting me in my good works, if there are any. And I'm going to trust Jesus and only Jesus for not only the salvation for eternity, but the things happening in my life right now. And sometimes all he's doing is waiting for that nod to say, you know what? I'm all in. And he's like, let's go. I got you covered.